Right, and the trick of it is now is really, 6 months from now when it comes to corporate decision making, right? The decisions you make today will be, the effects of that will be felt, off in the future. And if you don't make some of those decisions now, you can find yourself in a position where that decision's not available to you anymore. So I'll use as an example going back to the last recession. One of the reasons that Ford was able to avoid a government bailout is because Ford was a privately held, I should say closely held public company. It wasn't privately held, but closely held. So the Ford family still controls some 40% of the voting stock of Ford, even though they actually own only about 2% of the company. What that allows Ford to do is make long-term decisions regardless of what the analyst feedback is. So in early 2000 and really 2006, we began to really look at what was happening in the markets and what we needed to do to compete as a company, and began to lay the groundwork for, going and getting the capital we needed to weather the storm. The analysts would have never recommended we do that. Right, so the stock analyst, you do quarterly meetings because we were a public company, but the difference was Ford could go against the will of the analyst because they could play long ball, because they had the vote of the Ford family to be able to drive any specific corporate agenda item. And we took the decision to go borrow as much money as we could
at
in 2006 when the money was still available. And we locked in, I think it was somewhere around a $22 billion loan by the end of 2006. By January, February of 2007, the capital markets had locked down. You weren't getting the money. So you look at like GM's situation, they're a true public company. They're stuck with having to not be able to go against the will of the shareholders. And so while they saw all the same things we did, they're not, we weren't any smarter than they are. Those are smart economists. They could see what was happening, but they couldn't do anything about it because they couldn't get it past the shareholders. And so they were in a much tougher situation. And suddenly you find them in January, February of 2007, unable to get access to capital, right? And the risk of them not getting access to capital was the company beginning to default on some of its long-term debt obligations, those sorts of things, and the house of cards begins to crumble. And so, why did the government take the decision to bail out GM? Because the impact of a GM failing was not GM. It was GM and all of its suppliers and all of their suppliers. So you're looking at an ecosystem of 2-3 million jobs, not 300,000-400,000 jobs. That kind of shock to the employment markets going into a recession just accelerates you, right? You're going off the cliff. And so, when I talk to people about it today, there's, you'll find people who are like, well, I'm really not a fan of government bailouts. And I can understand the sentiment, but you've got to look at the larger context and say, sometimes you've got to do a bad thing to stop a worse thing from happening.